name is Antonio. In the mid-'80s, when I was young and had just moved to the city, I got a job as a delivery driver for a pizzeria. It was my first time living far from my small town, in a bigger place with tangled streets and neighborhoods I was just starting to get used to. Smartphones and map apps didn't exist back then, so we navigated with a paper map that my boss had lent me and the directions written down by customers. Every order included some details or references to avoid getting lost. That night, around 9 p.m., a customer called to order a pizza and a soda. The delivery was to a somewhat remote area in a rural subdivision I had never been to before. My boss didn't seem happy when he heard the address, but since I was the only one working, he asked me to go. "Don't take too long and come back quickly," he said in an odd tone, almost like a warning. I set off on my bike with the delivery secured in my bag. The trip was taking longer than I expected. It was getting darker and more desolate with each passing moment. There weren't many houses out there, just empty lots and trees swaying in the wind. The only light came from scattered streetlights that grew farther apart as I went. I kept looking at the map, trying to orient myself, but with so few clear references, I started feeling lost. I stopped frequently, trying to find a landmark that matched the directions on the paper, but nothing. After circling around a bit, I came across a dirt path that seemed to lead to a house. I wasn't sure if I should follow it, but I hoped someone there could give me directions. The house was about 20 meters away, surrounded by tall grass, and appeared to be in terrible condition. The walls had cracks, the windows were either broken or boarded up with old planks, and the roof looked partially collapsed. That's when I realized someone might have given me the wrong address, or maybe it was just a prank. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard a scream, a loud, clear scream of pure suffering coming from the house. I froze. That horrifying sound stopped me in my tracks. I looked around, hoping someone else had heard it, but there was no one. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, facing this house. What I had thought was an abandoned structure now seemed like the site of something terrible. I wanted to leave, but my impulse to help, or maybe my recklessness, made me decide to stay. Sometimes you act on instinct, and that's exactly what happened to me. I moved closer, crouching toward a broken window where I could see a faint light inside. When I peeked through the window, I saw something I never thought I'd witness in my life. Inside the house, there was a group of people dressed in red robes, all standing around a table. This wasn't just any table. It looked more like an altar. On it lay a person, completely still. Surrounding the table, the hooded figures were murmuring something, an eerie chant in unison. It wasn't in Spanish or any language I recognized. The words sounded cursed, and the tone in which they were spoken was deeply disturbing. The figure on the table had its face covered, and although I couldn't see clearly, I got the impression they were either unconscious or worse, lifeless. I was paralyzed as I realized these people weren't there by accident. Everything was prepared for what seemed like a horrific ritual, something I never imagined I'd encounter. From where I stood, I could see metallic objects, including knives, as well as strange symbols painted on the floor. These drawings appeared to have been made with something dark and dry, almost like bloodstains. My hands started trembling, and my breathing quickened. I wanted to run, but something kept me rooted in place, unable to look away. Every second, the situation seemed to grow more dangerous. Suddenly, one of the hooded figures lifted their head and looked directly toward the window, at me. I saw it clearly. Their face was shadowed, but I noticed the glint in their eyes. I swear, they knew I was there. Their stare felt like it pierced right through me, sensing my fear. Without hesitation, I bolted from the window, jumped on my bike, and pedaled as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard shouts. They were coming after me. My legs burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the pizzeria. Inside, I could barely speak. My boss came to calm me, and I told him everything. The screams, the robes, the man on the table. His reaction surprised me. Instead of being alarmed or calling the police, he stared silently, then said, "It's better not to talk about this, Antonio. We shouldn't get involved, or it could end badly for us." That night, I couldn't sleep. The chants and screams echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was real. The next day, I quit. I couldn't go back there or even use the same bike. Since then, I've avoided asking questions and tried to forget, but there are things you never truly leave behind. On quiet nights, I remember that stare, the eerie chants, and the man's expression, pure evil. I wonder if anyone else saw what I did. Is that house still there, waiting for someone else to peek inside? The city may have changed, but I'll never forget what I witnessed. My name is Oscar, and what I'm about to share is something that left a lasting mark on me. It's the reason why, although I'm still a delivery driver, I no longer accept orders for that building, or any other that reminds me of that place. It was a calm night, one of those where being a delivery driver becomes almost automatic. I remember I was wrapping up my shift with the last few deliveries before heading home. I accepted an order that seemed straightforward, just a few blocks away from where I was. It was for the Flores apartment building, an old construction in the city center. I don't usually pay much attention to the aesthetics of places, but from the first moment, that building felt strange. The lights flickered, the hallways were damp, and there was that smell of accumulated old things. When I arrived, the customer was already at the door. A man, older, wearing dark glasses and clothes that seemed from another era. He was waiting for me. His appearance was strange, but in this job, you learn not to judge. You meet all kinds of people. He greeted me with a nervous smile and paid me, but just as I handed him the food, he asked for a favor. "Young man, could you take a box up to apartment 305? It's nothing complicated, and of course, I'll give you a good tip." He showed me a small cardboard box, old, with no labels or anything to indicate its contents. I hesitated for a moment, but the generous tip convinced me. I accepted the task, and the man thanked me in a trembling voice, giving me a warning that would stick with me. "Don't open the box. Just leave it on the table and leave immediately." I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Each step felt heavier, and although the building was almost empty, the atmosphere on that floor was oppressive, like the very walls were holding something. I reached apartment 305, and as I got closer to the door, a strong smell hit me. It wasn't just the usual dampness. There was something metallic, like the scent of old rusted metal coming from behind the door. I knocked a couple of times. Nothing. I was about to leave the box on the floor, but at that moment, I heard a muffled voice, faint and low, asking me to come in. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. I froze for a few seconds, but my desire to finish the task quickly won out. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was practically empty, just a few dusty pieces of furniture and an old television turned on, showing static. The screen was pure white noise, and the faint sound of static filled the space, making me feel even more uneasy. I walked to the table in the living room, and just as I was about to leave the box, I heard the voice again. This time clearer. It sounded like a warning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Despite my discomfort, I left the box on the table and turned to leave as quickly as I could. As I walked toward the door, my eyes accidentally drifted to a small side table. On it was a framed photograph. What I saw in the picture sent chills down my spine. It was the same man who had received me at the entrance, but he was standing with a group of people. They all wore somber expressions and were dressed in a way that seemed from another time, almost as if the photograph was decades old. Recognizing his face gave me a deep sense of unease. His expression in the photo was different, almost vacant, as if devoid of life. I tried to look away, but something about the image unsettled me. When I finally left the apartment, I practically ran down the stairs. I ran into the building's concierge, a man in his 50s with whom I had exchanged a few words before going up. Without knowing exactly what to say, I mentioned the strange encounter with the man at the entrance and told him about apartment 305. As soon as I said the number, his expression changed drastically. He looked at me seriously, with a mix of warning and pity in his eyes. "Unman, no one has lived in 305 years. The last tenant was an old man who, well, he died a long time ago under strange circumstances." I didn't know how to respond. How could someone who had supposedly died be the same man I had just seen at the entrance? I tried to make sense of what the concierge was telling me, but I couldn't. I decided not to dwell on it. I had completed the delivery and just wanted to leave. When I got home, still feeling uneasy, I decided to search for information about the building and apartment 305, more out of curiosity than anything else. That's when I found an old news article about a fire in that apartment. It turned out several people had died in that apartment back in the 1980s. One of the victims matched the description of the customer who had asked me for the favor. The article described him as a reserved man who rarely left his apartment and often asked neighbors for small favors, like picking up a package or moving a box. From that night on, every time I think about the Flores apartment building, I feel strange, like there's still something unresolved there. The box I left on the table, the television inexplicably on, and the photograph. All of it is burned into my memory. I've made sure never to go back to that building, but somehow it still lingers in my mind. I don't know if I'll ever stop wondering who the man I saw that night really was.